Well, first of all, thank you all for being here. I see some familiar faces, people that I haven't seen in a while. So, Brendan, nice to see you. Haven't seen you in a very long time. I'm very happy to see you, and also my colleagues from Axon. I see some here and some of my clients. So, very happy to be here, Kathleen, and thank you so much for the invitation. So let me just give a little bit of background so everybody here has some context of the stories that we're going to be sharing. I am a partner with Axialent, and Axialent is a culture transformation and leadership development firm. So we've been in existence for 20 years or so, working with many large organizations around the world. So we have a global presence, and we work with companies in all different continents. And our clients, basically, I would say we have a wide variety of clients. So we work across all different industries, and we work with it's like big, large organizations like Procter and Gamble and AstraZeneca and Cisco and P&G and Coca-Cola, Google. So we've worked with a lot of big organizations. But also we work with, which is, I find very interesting, with companies that are growing and scaling up very quickly. So we either work with organizations that are already in existence and they say, you know what, we need to take our culture to the next level. We need to evolve and change, or we need our leaders to continue to evolve and find new ways of working. And now with AI, we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's really accelerating very quickly. But we also work with organizations that are growing and scaling. And as they grow and scale, they want to preserve what make them special in the first place, and then also continue to evolve and scale their culture in a very conscious way. So that's how we have worked with actually many Silicon Valley companies when they were starting, like LinkedIn, and also with one of the biggest e-commerce companies in Latin America, which is called Mercado Libre. So that gives you a range of kind of the clients that we work with.
That's a great background. Thanks, Teryluz. And Teryluz and I were reminiscing about, working in this space for the past 20 plus years and seeing how culture has evolved. At first, 20 some odd years ago, you had to talk to clients about what culture is and why it's important. And now the work is so much deeper. Everyone knows culture is important, but getting a language and a measure around it and really shaping culture in a way that's related to success is key. So, Terry Luz, on that note, how and when did you start working with HS?
So I started actually got familiar with HS many years ago when I was working at Aon. So I started my career working in large global consulting firms. So I came across HS first when I was at Aon many years ago, and, and got familiar with the Circumplex and the OCI and the LSI. But I started working with the tools more closely when I joined Axialent. So Axialent has been partnering with HS for many years, and there's a good reason for that. I think that there's a lot of alignment in terms of how we see culture, and how do we move beyond just describing what a culture is, which is what a lot of culture models do, right? Do you have a more innovative culture, more based on the culture archetypes, right? Do you have a more innovative culture or customer centric culture, or more like one team culture, which it's valid on its own. But what we really liked about the HS model is that it really goes into those cultural norms that exist, and really help us then move the needle. I think describing the culture is not enough. You really need to understand what works and doesn't work. So having a point of view on that is very helpful. So for a lot of the work that we do at Axialent, and we'll talk a little bit about conscious business, which is kind of the underlying philosophy of everything we do at Axialent, was very helpful because it allows us to surface the unconscious behaviors, maybe, or norms that may be guiding the how people work together in an organization. So I I've been using quite a bit the HS tool since I joined Axialent 5 years
Great.
ago.
Yeah, that's a good distinction too, because there are a lot of typology tools around culture, but the OCI gets at behaviors, and it's also very prescriptive in terms of where are we at right now with our culture versus what's our ideal culture or our values and how do we live them, which is a perfect segue to what's on Axialent's website. And we wanted to ask you a little bit about what this means. So it says, conscious business is a business where personal success is aligned with group success, and group success is aligned with business success. What does that mean to you and your clients?
I know that sounds like a good slogan, right? Like it sounds very interesting on its own, but I have to say that maybe I need to explain a little bit the underlying philosophy of conscious business. So that really helps us understand what that means in real terms. So actually, we were founded by Fred Kaufman, who wrote a book that is called Conscious Business. And um, what we have followed that underlying framework for developing all the solutions over the years. And basically, what conscious business stands for is that we can be in service of driving sustainable and exceptional results, but we can do so when we can balance three key dimensions. And we call them the I, the we, and the it, right? The it is what a lot of exactly, Rafael, you got it there. He got the book. The it dimension is what we talk a lot about in business. So it's how do we achieve the results that we want as an organization, and those are not only financial results but also mission driven results, like our purpose, what we stand for. The we dimension, which is how people relate, um, how do they collaborate, how do they work together to achieve those goals, and then the I dimension, which is the individual. What's my level of engagement, my level of satisfaction, well-being, and overall self-realization that we know we measure in the LSI, right? Self-actualization. So when those three dimensions are in balance, that's when we achieve sustainable, extraordinary results. And it's basically being conscious about how do we create that? Not being an automatic pilot, but really having the right conversations and enabling the right environment for those conversations to happen and for people to come together to make that happen. And this is just to make it a little bit more personal. You mentioned that we've been doing this for a long time. Yes, I've been in the talent development and leadership development and engagement space for a long time, my whole career, and had the great opportunity of working with many big, I think the biggest employers in the world. Brendan and I did a lot of that work when we were at Aon, leading super big engagement studies and analytics and strategies for many large organizations. Uh, One with millions of employees, by the way, or hundreds of thousands of employees. And what happened to me, I have to say, is that with time, I became a little bit jaded. You know, I became a little bit jaded because I was doing these great engagement surveys, these analytics, culture assessments as well. And after a couple of years, it was kind of having the same conversation in repeat, right? People want more feedback. People want more development opportunities. There's perceptions of unfair pay. People want to feel recognized and valued. They want to have the right tools and resources to get the work done. Let's develop engaging leaders that connect with people as people. So I was very good at pointing out the problems and the gaps and providing surface level solutions, and a lot of great solutions, by the way. It's not to put that we had a great team and we did a lot of great work on, let's put together the recognition system, let's create the new performance management process, let's fix the problems that we can control, right, especially in big organizations. But it was very hard to shift behaviors. It was very hard to shift mindsets. And after you take care of the systems, we did the performance management program, we had the recognition system, we evaluated the pay, we did the role evaluations, did all that great work, but the problems persisted because at the end of the day, it came down to how do we drive different behaviors and different ways of looking at things. So that's actually one of the reasons why I joined Axialent. It's because I found here some very effective ways in which they have been able to do this with big companies. And I think what you saw at the Culture Con conversation that Maricel had, it's proof that it can be done. It's not easy, but it can be done.
That leads me to the next question for you, which is once you help a client get a picture of their ideal culture and paying attention to and emphasizing the it and the goals being really clear yet challenging, the we, the teamwork and development aspect, and the I, the acting with integrity and growing yourself and learning from mistakes. How do you cascade that picture of an ideal culture down from the executive team into the larger organization?
Yeah. So I think that's the question that if we could solve, with the magic wand, that's the one that I think a lot of people here would like to have that magic formula, right? In terms of how do we do it. Um, so I'm going to give you a consultant answer, which is it depends, right? But it's actually being very intentional. It all starts there. So we used to talk in Axialent about the snowball effect, which is basically that starting from the top and then moving down. So it's like this snowball effect in terms of if you don't role model these desired mindsets and behaviors and ways of working from the top, it's very hard to do that at the bottom. And that is still true. I have to say it's much easier. Let's just put it this way. It's much easier when you have the buy-in from the senior leadership team. Not only the buy-in, that they really believe in this, that they sponsor this. Like you don't have to convince them. It's like they see the need and you are facilitating the conversation about why do you guys really want to change? That's the first conversation I always have with my with my with my clients is that we have a very honest and true conversation. It's like, so here's where you say you want to go, right? And this is where you are. And that's when the data that we use from HS is very helpful. So there's some gaps, right? We're not there yet. The key question is, yeah, we identify the shifts and we do that exercise of the from twos, right? So what are the key behaviors that got to shift where we are today, where we want them to be? But then we just have a very honest conversation and say, do we really have the energy, the desire, and the compelling reason for us to really do things differently? And if so, what are we really willing to let go and what are we really willing to do? And and that's a very honest conversation that we need to have. I think in my past lives, I was very hesitant of having those conversations. I think the C-suite were so used to catering to them in order to because they're rushed and they're always running and they have a big agenda, and especially in big companies, there's a lot of massaging of the of the messages in order to make it more palatable. But you're not having the real conversation about this is what's happening, and this is how you see things, and this is how the rest of your organization see things. And there's a reason for that. Let's talk about that. So I think we are very effective at facilitating those conversations and really putting things on the table in a very real but caring way. And I think that comes from having a very strong background in coaching. And so we come in with curiosity, we come in with courage, but we come in with caring. And what I've seen and what I have experienced working with my great clients is that when you do so in a very constructive, when you are role modeling the constructive ways as the facilitator, constructive conversations happen. So I think that it starts with us. It starts with the way we structure the conversations to be constructive and to be modeled around the culture that they want to drive. So at Axialent, we're very conscious about how we go about the conversations. I think there's a mastery to that. And I have to say, it didn't happen for me immediately. This has been it's been a journey and continues to be a journey for me. And I am very grateful for the great colleagues, and some of them are here, the great colleagues that have joined me in this journey, because I wasn't used to having these courageous, caring, and real conversations, and I have learned to have them. Um, so going back to your original question, it's much easier, yes, if we have the buy-in from the senior leadership team, they have the commitment, and they start role modeling their behaviors, but that takes time, right? We don't change our habits, we don't change our mindsets from one day to the next. It takes time, it takes practice. And we actually accompany these senior leadership teams very closely, not only on facilitating these conversations, but they probably need some new frameworks and tools to help them make that shift. And also we help them while they're doing their work. So we sit on their meetings, we give them real-time feedback, we help them collaborate differently and more effectively. But that takes time, that doesn't happen overnight. I would say to start seeing some good shifts, you need at least three or 4 months to start seeing some good sustainable changes. Um, but while that happens, what needs to happen, and I think where a lot of the culture efforts fail, is that then we need to start putting together the infrastructure for driving and sustaining the culture change, right? And that is not going to happen just because of the senior leadership is behaving differently. Um, there needs to be a concerted effort and infrastructure and resources assigned to driving the culture shifts. And then you have to align the way we do things to that desired culture, but not try to boil the ocean. I think a big mistake that companies do is that they put out these big culture statements, and they say, this is our desired culture, and they do their culture manifesto. There's nothing wrong with that, but I think that it's not just a communication exercise. And trying to drive every single culture shift that you want to do is it's too difficult. Um, so the best, in my experience, the best way to go about it, and what we've seen at Axialent, is picking one or two things that you want to be very intentional about, and then how do we embed that in our symbols, systems, and behaviors, so we can start driving that very consciously, measuring impact, seeing the shifting, the changes, and then building from that. So that's a lot of the work that we do too, is to help the clients while we work with the senior leadership team, and helping them drive that, and being very intentional about how, not only how they work differently, it's also in the messages they send, in the decisions that they make. How do they embed that? That requires some external view sometimes, because you're trying to see things differently. Um, in addition to that, you also need to put together the infrastructure to start then driving the more scalable change, which I think it's sometimes it started with a lot of enthusiasm, and then it loses steam over time.
I think
Teryluz,
that's a great. Oh, go ahead, Rich.
yeah, I just wanted to I want to say we've got a question actually from the audience that I think fits very well into the point that you're making from Brendan O'Connor. One of the challenges we often face is a client who filters recommendations through the just lens of, but that's just the way we are,
Mm-hmm.
disregarding key elements of needed change. Can you tell us how you'd approach clients like that, especially in using the ideal culture measure to break some of those assumptions?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brendan. So my first question always is, are you okay with that? That's just the way you are, but are you okay with that?
Hmm.
Because if you're okay with it, and you don't have the energy to change it, then it's a mute point, right? But if it's something that is holding you back, then the question is why you haven't changed it in the past. Because sometimes, there's some known issues. I have to say, many times what the OSI or the LSI reveals is not completely new information. That's why we have blind spots, and when we do the LSI, the blind spots, the known confirm strengths, etc. Um, but many times there's some aha moments, but I have to say, for the most part, people kind of know some way or the other, right? So, um, so if they know this is an issue, um, it's just the way we are. I think the first question I ask, well, are you okay with that? And what is the benefit that it has given you being that way? But also, what has been the cost? And and now, and what would be the cost or the benefit 5 years from now, based on where you want to go as an organization. So that's the first question I ask, because if there's no, they don't feel, it's like, oh, it's the way I am, but it is what it is. Then if we say in Axialent, no gap, no coaching, right? So when I'm working with a client, if they don't perceive a gap, it's very hard for them to do something about it. So the first thing that I have to do as a consultant or as a coach is to open the gap. But if they don't perceive there's a gap, then there's nothing to do, right? So I use the data to kind of open the gap. So I look for, well, maybe it's not an issue for you, but look at how it's impacting the other levels in your organization, or look how this is translating into your ability to adopt these new technologies or expanding to new markets. So what does that mean for that? Now, I'm not, I can point out what the data says, or I can point out what I see, but at the end of the day, it's their decision, right? It's the client's decision on whether they want to do something about it or not. So my first job is to try to open the gap and then say, so what have been the benefits and what has been the cost of doing this way? And then, are you okay with that? And then if the answer is no, I'm not okay with that, or I can see that this could hinder us in the future, then the question is, before moving into, so what do you do about it, which is the temptation of the consultants, is to then move into, so what do you want to do about it? Is to say, well, so what's driving this? What are the beliefs that you have that you feel are driving this behavior? What's behind this? And
And
then that's when the conversation becomes very, very rich, right? Because not a lot of people have really asked them that. So that's something that I think we do very well at Excellent.
yeah, and presumably the clients brought you in for a reason, right? And so that's a great segue into the presentation I saw at CultureCon from your client Marisol, who's a VP at TELUS Digital, a
Mhm.
global telecommunications company. And she talked a lot about the work that you did there. So curious to know why you were originally brought in to TELUS and what was the approach that you took with them.
Yeah, so TELUS Digital. It's a very interesting story. And by the way, we're sharing this because Maricel, shared this with the broader audience at CultureCon. So we started working with TELUS, I think it was back in 2019, when they were anticipating that they were going to go through a lot of change. They're in a very um, rapidly evolving market. So actually, they started as a division of TELUS, which is a big telecommunication company in Canada, Canadian-based telecommunication company, but they have different businesses. So TELUS Digital started as their customer service division at TELUS, and they did such a good job that they're like, hey, we can sell these services to bigger companies. So they're actually the CX um, arm for many technology, gaming organizations. And now they're just a standalone company. So, but they're huge. They're the biggest company you've never heard about. They have over 60,000 employees. They work globally. Most of their workforce is global. So they're in the Philippines, in Central America, in Eastern Europe, in Ireland. They're all over the place, and Africa. So they operate all over the place. And at the time, they have a very strong culture and also very good employee engagement. They're actually one of the great places to work in many of the markets in which they operate. And the human touch for them is very important. Very strong affiliative culture for those of you who are familiar with the Circumplex. Um, and they wanted to preserve that. They said, we want to make sure that as we evolve, as we change, as we integrate new digital companies that they were acquiring, we keep the good things about our culture and evolve the ones that may be holding us back. So that's how we started working with them, is to identify very clearly and develop a common language around culture, because they were talking about it, but they were referring to different things, and there was a little bit of a mixed communication and some issues. So they said, you know what, we need a common language to talk about this. We need to have a common understanding so we can have a common definition. And then we can do a more conscious effort on building that culture that we really want. So that's how we started working with them and facilitating those conversations with the senior leadership team.
I think Rich is trying to ask a question from the audience,
Oh
but you might
yeah,
be on mute.
Gulam, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tari. This is really, really an inspiring conversation going on. I would like to ask two specific points. One, that in the overall context of I, we, and it, as you have mentioned, that behavioral change, it is the hardest component to address. So, what are various models of the frameworks which are advisable from your side to actually get that behavioral alteration in motion in with regards to the overall culture change program? One, and the other one is that you see the biggest trouble or the stumbling block that happens to be in the life of organizations is culture in itself, and it blocks a lot of good performances and everything like that, and productivity and everything like that. However, the organizations are in continuous kind of a motion, and they are in continuous kind of a race to embed technologies at a very, very high speed. So, what do you think are the most astute cultural as well as behavioral elements to take care of in order to keep the culture aligned and in order to keep the performance moving?
Okay. So, Gulam, those are two heavy questions. So I'm going to try to answer them as best as I can in the time that we have. So I think your first question is, how do you drive behavior change, right? I think to some extent it's easier to work with the symbols and the systems because you can control them a little bit more centrally. But yeah, behavioral change is always kind of the missing piece in many of the culture initiatives that we do that are done. And it was my frustration in my past experience that I was telling you about. So I can share with you what we do at Axialent that I have found is much more effective than what I tried in the past. Okay, so I don't think there's a silver bullet for this, but there's some approaches that work better than others. And in our case, what we find is it's more effective is that when it's the temptation when we think about behavior change is to start making interventions on the doing part, right? So it's to give people, for example, we want to build a culture of listening and psychological safety and where feedback flows, right? That's something we hear a lot because psychological safety is important for high performing teams and for people to feel respected and heard. So that's something, let's take that one. But we could take any, like culture of experimentation or culture of innovation or of different things. Let's just take that one just because it's a common one. So the temptation is to go in and so give people a bunch of training on how to give and receive feedback, put in all these really feedback tools and create feedback loops and then expecting people that because they know something, they're going to do it. And the reality is that knowing is not the same as being able to. So what we do at Axialent is that we take one step before the doing, which is the being part, is the mindsets part. Is if people don't give or do not receive feedback because of the mechanics of the feedback many times. Because I think for most Fortune 500 organizations, they have even online courses, or you can go to LinkedIn and or to Coursera or to whomever, or just Google it, and now you can put it in ChatGPT and it give you a framework for giving and receiving feedback. It's what's behind it that really holds you back from giving it or giving it or receiving it, right? So what we do a lot when we work with organizations, and actually the OCI and the LSI gives us some good insights into why people may be resisting feedback or may not be sharing feedback, right? So what we do is try to surface what are those mindsets that are holding you back from doing it, and then giving you some new ways of looking at things or approaching those situations so you can be more effective on giving and receiving feedback. So for example, we talk a lot about the learner mindset at Axialent, right? There's some foundational mindsets like the growth mindset, the learner mindset, the player mindset, that those are like foundational new ways of approaching things and approaching how you interact with others and how you see yourself, that give you like new lenses to then interact with others. So that makes it easier for you to be a good provider of feedback, but also a good receiver of feedback, right? So one of the key effective things that I think we've done with TELUS, at TELUS, for example, but we've done the same. Gustavo here is a part of our faculty network now, and he used to be at P&G as one of our clients, is that once you start seeing things from a different perspective, you cannot unsee them, right? So this is very helpful for culture change because when we're working with clients and they start seeing things from a different perspective, open up their curiosity, open up their ways of they approach a challenge from a more player mindset, for example, which is basically focusing on your ability to respond in the face of challenges and deciding to focus on the things you can control, then the decisions you make are different, right? And that impacts your behavior and the way you approach things. So that I think that that's very key, is to address the underlying mindsets, but also even the smartest people sometimes need some very practical tools to do things differently. So it's not enough to kind of be aware of your mindsets and we're creating that self-awareness and where you're operating from, but also then the mechanics of it. So, and that's when the doing piece is very helpful, right? So those two together, and then the continuous loop of intentional practice and reinforcement. So one of the things we do in a lot of our programs and when we work on cultural interventions is that it's not a one-off kind of workshop or inspirational speech. We actually work on their flow of work and we integrate into their flow of work to help them practice these new things, give each other's grace, have continuous feedback so they can do it better. And also we use we do this through our like learning and coaching interventions, but we also do it through digital tools that are very helpful to kind of create new habits and new ways of working. So it's not an easy thing to do, but it can be done.
Thanks, Teryluz. And I do love how Axialent uses the approach of creating a picture of the ideal culture and where we want to be, and then getting a composite of the leadership team's 360s to understand where the gaps are in their own mindsets and behaviors, to create the knowing, the knowledge. But then, as you said, there are a lot of tools that go into place with workshops and other approaches to get the doing piece. So you've got the knowledge, you see the gap, then you have to get into the doing. And one of the tools we actually have, and we've been talking about, Teryluz, is our new 360 platform. Sorry, shameless pitch, where people can get into understanding their own styles as a leader and where they have some strengths versus blind spots around living the constructive values and role modeling them in the organization. But I do want to go back to TELUS because I really loved Marisol's presentation. Can you talk a little bit about why they brought you in and the work that you did there for them?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, what they wanted to do was to make sure that they were very intentional about the culture that they wanted to drive, as they were undergoing a lot of change. So in their case was going public, then going back, also acquisitions. They're experiencing, they're actually at the forefront of AI, acquired AI-based companies. So they were just going to go through a lot of change, and they knew it. So they were very proactive in terms of bringing us in to help them shape that desired culture. And then our work with them was a lot around helping them define what that desired culture was. And for that, we use the OCI ideal. We also have done a lot of work with them in terms of assessing current culture. So then we can kind of open the gap and identify what are the key shifts that they needed. We did a whole intervention on culture IQ, meaning making sure that when we talk about culture, we're all sharing the same language and talking about the same things, so we can facilitate the difficult conversations that came around behavioral change. And then we've been doing a lot of work with them on their leadership development programs, and also team interventions. So we believe that teams are very important for how people operate together, because that's when the rubber hits the road. So we do a lot of different signature programs and master classes for their leaders to embed the new desired leadership behaviors, give them practical tools to apply this into their day-to-day. We have some that are shorter, some that are a little bit longer journeys, depending on the level. And then we also work with some of their teams around the world, in the Philippines, in Central America, in Europe, in different places, to help them perform at a higher level. And for that, we use actually a lot of the LSI tools in order to create that self-awareness and understand team dynamics.
Thanks, Teryluz. And I know a topic we've been touching on a lot is AI, and we did promise to get into that a little bit, I think, on a LinkedIn post. So what are you hearing from the C-suite as far as AI and its impact on culture?
Yeah, I have to say this is a fascinating, for me as a culture practitioner, it's a fascinating topic. And let me share with you a little story. Last year, I was invited to go into the MIT CIO Symposium, so that in Cambridge. So that was a very interesting event. It was like I think a 2 or 3 day event. All CIOs or CTOs or chief digital officers. So I was one of the few people, talent people there. Um, and I was, I've been following AI. Obviously, we're using AI at Axialent. So it's not, we have a digital division at Axialent that it's doing a lot of interesting work in that space to help our clients and do blended solutions. But I had, I have never been with so many CIOs in one room. And these were not the Silicon Valley cool tech dudes, these were the CIOs that up until 10 years ago, they were supposed to make sure that we do have the right safety measures, that we were implementing Workday and or SAP, I don't know, things like that, and suddenly they're in the middle of this big conversation on AI that is having huge impacts, or could potentially have huge impacts on the way people work, on the delivery models, on the way they serve customers, on security risks, and just societal impacts overall. So I felt I left there with my head exploding. And I don't know, I had a mix of hope and angst, I have to say. And I think my clients feel the same way. Let's just be honest here. I think there's different camps in terms of how we see AI. And we have the ones that are super enthusiastic and they're like, this is gonna be wonderful, and we just need to run and experiment and see how this goes. And then we have others that are kind of on the fence, sitting and waiting. And then most of us are in the middle, like trying some new things here and there, and kind of trying to figure it out. And what I'm hearing from my clients, I hear these are the questions I'm hearing. is what do we need to change in the way we work in order for us to accelerate the adoption of AI? How do we manage resistance to AI? How do we need to shift the way that different business units or the way our governance works for these AI investments to really scale and get the right return on investment? And how do we need to approach things differently? So it's very interesting because it's more around how do we need to change to adapt to AI? And what I'm more curious about is should we be asking the question the other way around, which is how is AI going to be disrupting the way we work, and do we want that or not, right? So it's like I feel there's a lot of talk about how unavoidable is AI, and it's like we just need to adopt it and then kind of pay the consequences, and we'll mitigate the consequences and figure them out. And I think that just using the player mindset that we learn at Axialent, we need to turn it around and say, well, how can we be more intentional about this?
Sure.
And we've been very concerned about that, and we really are working with our clients to drive this different conversation. Because it's in many organizations, AI is just little experiments. There's not a concerted there's a desire and there's investments, but there's not a concerted strategy in terms of how all this is working together. Because for starters, many organizations were not very well centrally coordinated. So it's like AI kind of reflects the way they work today, which is very decentralized. And I don't think that many organizations are proactively having the conversations about how is AI going to be impacting our culture, and do we want that or not? And if we're going to be adopting AI, which we probably have to be competitive, and how do we do it in a way that supports that desired culture we want and mitigate the risks? And actually, we're doing a lot of research around this, working with a lot of AI experts in the AI era, working with a lot of AI native companies that are already using AI for a couple of years now as part of their business development, business delivery model. And big companies that are adopting AI and trying to transform. So we're talking to them to see what are the impacts that AI is having so we can inform these conversations better with our clients. And also we started a program last year with Duke University on building AI ready cultures that has sparked a lot of very interesting conversations. So more to come on these area, but I think there's a lot of for those of us that are here that are very interested in culture and driving constructive cultures. I think we have a very important role to play, putting this on the table, facilitating these conversations as part of the AI strategy and not as an afterthought. And we need to broaden the conversation beyond how can we use AI to drive productivity and efficiency, to talk about the bigger impacts that this can have in the organization as responsible, and the I with it, right? Like what are the impacts on the I with it, and having intentional and conscious conversations about this. And also, I think we have the responsibility of thinking a little bit ahead. So not just thinking about how culture, I think the conversation around culture has been a lot about how is culture an impediment to accelerate adoption. Um, and I think we need to shift that conversation. It's not that that's not a valid conversation, but it is important. But I think there's a broader conversation that needs to happen that I don't feel it's happening in a lot of places.
Teryluz, I completely agree that this is a part of the conversation that's just not happening. I'm deep in the marketing world, and all of the cultural conversations around AI are about, how do we get everybody on board as quickly as possible? Unfortunately, like something like 67% of all AI projects fail. Like they start as largely as experiments and they don't land. So in order to like the fact that you're bringing up these cultural issues doesn't make you a Luddite. Like you don't believe that in the promise of AI. It's if we can ever hope to see the promise and the productivity gains that AI could potentially bring, we have to take people very much into consideration and be very thoughtful about how we use it or not. And that I think is a very interesting way to apply some of the ideas that Axialent and HS and all of you here combine. I did want to, we're about 11 minutes left, so I wanted to turn to some of the questions here. I will also remind you that if you'd like to try to get a question in here in the remaining time, you can raise your hand by clicking on that heart at the bottom, and there's a raise my hand button there. Um, we do have a couple questions. Here's one from Felix asks kind of what is the duration of the average consulting project that you're taking on and what would determine what the duration would be?
Yeah. So I think it depends on the kind of project, right? But if we're talking about culture transformation, so there's different kinds of projects that we do with our clients, but culture transformation project typically has a long duration. Um, we we go beyond just measuring and saying, hey, this is what the culture is all about, and then walk away. We work with the clients and partner with the clients. So typically our I would say it's multi-year. It's 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. It depends, right? In terms of the client. For some of the leadership development initiatives, those tend to be also like typically 9 months or multi-years too, because it's not just like a one-off. It requires, we work with and partner with clients on an ongoing basis. So we tend to have long engagements with our clients and partner with them over several years. And our aim is to create internal capability, not to be dependent on us, right? So then after a while, they have this, they got it. If we did our job right, they're adopting these, they shifted behaviors, and we continue to evolve our partnership, but also what we do and the way we support them evolves as well.
I think it's interesting that all three of the culture change conversations that we've had in the last couple of months, we realized, Kathleen and I looked at each other and realized that all of those sort of inadvertently um, consisted of conversations about multi-year engagements where culture transformation, when you talk about this snowflake effect or the idea that you um, cascade down from the top of the organization through to leaders and then through to the rest of the organization. It's clear that that doesn't happen overnight. And I think we all have tools at our disposal to guide each individual step of that process, which is very important. We've got
Yeah.
another question here from Laszlo, who says, "How are you managing?" And I think this speaks kind of to it's close to the AI. Before AI, everything was about digital transformation, right? Um, but Laszlo's asking, how are you managing culture change in highly virtual organizations? It seems much more challenging to influence individual team and org mindset and behaviors. We don't have a lot of in-person contact. I know this is a thing that all of us here virtually contacting each other can understand.
Yeah. So, so Richard, one thing I wanted to add to my prior response is that even though it's multi-year engagements, we treat it as an agile project many times for the big transformation processes. So Felix, we try to chunk it down in sprints so we can see results by phases. So because it's discouraging to wait 3 years to see a result, right? So we are very intentional about using sprints or agile methodologies too to drive culture transformation. So that's something that we use quite a bit. And so it's a longer journey, but we see improvements over time. So it's not waiting until the end. So that's something I wanted to call out. So Laszlo, I agree. It's great when you get people together and what we actually call it the magic in the room, when we can get people together and connect as human beings, and that's ideal. But we have learned to create what we call blended by design interventions. So what that means is that sometimes it's not feasible to have people in person, or even desired, right, for different reasons. So the way we do it is that we still create a live, if we're talking about behavioral change, we still create live touch points for people to get together and exchange ideas and learn from each other and to have that community feeling. But we have, I think, developed some great approaches to also provide support for individuals when they're not together and when they cannot interact on a day-to-day basis with their teammates or their coworkers. So actually, that's one of the reasons why we created our digital division that is called Stoic Enterprises. And so we have a lot of different AI mentors and AI coaches that help people create new habits and also embed the changes in behaviors and mindsets into their ways of working. We also create a lot of virtual communities for people to exchange their experiences and learnings with each other, and we make that easy for those communities to emerge. And then we also, as I mentioned, have facilitated spaces in which sometimes an excellent coach is present or the clients auto facilitate, but we kind of help them very intentionally design the whole intervention so people have that sense of community. We also practice on the I, do projects that are applied into their day-to-day work, which may impact the it. So that permeates a lot of the things that we do. So we try to ensure that the spaces in which people are together, even if it's virtually, they get a lot of value from it, and to have powerful moments together. So some of the people that are in the call here help facilitate those spaces. So we're very intentional about that because the reality is that it's not realistic especially with bigger companies, to have everybody face to face.
Something on
Right.
the topic of remote cultures that just comes to mind for me is, we see a lot of consistency when we measure ideal culture across organizations, but obviously a lot of differences in current operating cultures. At the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a lot of constructive current operating cultures. And we were asking people in the organization, the client sponsors, what's it like right now working there and what's going on? Well, people were meeting online constantly. They were being very open and authentic about the problems that they were facing in their departments or the challenges with clients. They were getting together and problem solving as teams. They were meeting more, seeing each other's faces even more than they had pre-pandemic by meeting online. So I thought that was interesting when we talk about a remote culture and how do you shape it. There's still the interactions, they're just a little bit different. And sometimes we want to hold on to, well, how do we problem solve and be authentic and be open in this way that was happening with a lot of organizations at the beginning of the pandemic?
Yeah.
Looks like we have one final question from Brendan. If you can unmute, Brendan, go ahead.
Thank you. Sort of building off what Kathleen was just saying about how things have been shifting since the beginning of the pandemic. One of the other things that we've seen with employee engagement is that early on, it was driven most heavily by interactions with your direct manager. But once the pandemic started, the impact of senior leadership has been growing, and it's almost outpacing the impact of your direct manager. A lot because people are feeling much more directly impacted by visible decisions of senior leaders. They feel much more connected to them. How are you seeing that play out in the culture work that you're doing and in some of the shifts that you're making with advising with clients?
Yeah, that's a great question, Brendan. I think that, managers are still very important in terms of dictating culture norms. and reinforcing or not several culture norms. Certainly, as it relates to culture, senior leaders also have a strong weight or stronger weight, I have to say, because there's the ones that set the tone for a lot of what things are happening. But and I think this is going to be very interesting in terms of how it evolves with AI, because it's kind of in some organizations, I'm not saying on all, but in some organizations, the fiber of the human connection may be disrupted as well. So I was talking to a client of mine the other day that they have developed an AI that can do the performance reviews and can do the goal setting for people. So key things that the managers were tasked to do. Now an AI can potentially do it. So I'm just curious. So Brendan, just to answer your question quickly, yes, senior leadership, extremely important on culture, engagement. I still feel, even though they influence engagement, I still think the relationship with your manager can make or break that. A lot of your engagement still has a very strong impact today. How is that going to evolve? I'm curious, based on what's going on.
Well, everyone, thank you so much for all these wonderful conversations and great questions. I love how interactive this has been, how everybody's kind of jumped in with questions. Really, definitely want to thank Teryluz for being an incredible and dynamic person. As you can't tell, but when her blur is off behind her, she's got a nice little relax thing plaque behind her. And every time I talk to Teryluz, it's a truly enlightening and relaxing conversation. Thanks to our co-host Kathleen Cooke, and thank you to all of you. We do these things about once a month. Love the community that's started to form around it. It's been growing every time. We will send a recording and a transcript. AI helps us summarize. You'll get all the summaries. We hope that if you have questions for Teryluz or interested in collaborating with her or Kathleen and want to hear more about HS and our handy dandy new LSI 360 that we love to talk about, please get in touch. Looking forward to much more of this conversation going forward. Thanks you guys so much, and we will see you at the next one of these.
Thank you very much.
All right,
Thank
thanks again.
you.
Bye bye.